Stop me if you've heard this one. Two people are discussing President Donald Trump and his administration on television, on social media, in a YouTube comment section, and person A says, "The Trump administration is the worst in modern American history. Name one good issue that the administration has handled well." And then person B says, "Maybe LGBT rights? The administration has been good there." And then person A, having not updated their talking points in about 4 years and having not paid even the slightest bit of attention, says, "Sure, I guess." This is not true. The Trump administration has consistently rolled back non-discrimination protections for LGBT Americans in dozens of ways over the past 3.5 years. The Trump administration has been consistently hostile to the LGBT community. The Trump administration, based on the trajectory of Trump's first term, would almost certainly continue this pattern into a second term. So, why is person B saying this, and why does person A not push back on this? How did Donald Trump manage to make this a talking point that is brought up by Republican politicians and conservative media? Well, the talking point was created during his campaign, and with most of the rollbacks and new discrimination practices rarely making headlines during an administration full of larger scandals and constant shocking stories and bizarre statements, these rollbacks and new discrimination practices just don't last in the news cycle very long. Do you even remember when the administration removed protections for incarcerated transgender people? Do you remember when Trump fired his entire Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS? Do you even remember either of those things happening? Well, they did, and 100 other things that made LGBT Americans' lives worse these past 3.5 years. There is only so much space, only so much one can hear before it becomes white noise. It is perhaps the Trump administration's greatest strength. Their constant scandals and incompetence escalates and shocks so much that a lot of it just falls by the wayside to make room for the next worst thing ever. If you stick around, you will get a huge list of what they have been up to in regards to the LGBT community. Unassailable evidence that the administration is actually terrible for LGBT Americans. But first, how did we even get here? In 2016, Donald Trump ran a campaign that largely avoided discussing LGBT rights, and when cornered on the topic, he deflected or couched his answers in economics. For example, when asked about a recent North Carolina law that banned transgender people from public bathrooms, Trump responded that the law was not worth the economic hardship. The law caused problems for North Carolina, with many organizations considering pulling their business. By claiming what everyone else already believed, that the law would cause economic hardship, Trump managed to be on the right side of history in that moment, even if his reasoning was financial and not moral. In the same interview, he was asked if Republican Caitlyn Jenner would be allowed to use the bathroom at Trump Tower, and Trump said yes. Of course, this is such a low bar that anyone could have leapt over it. It was already the law in New York anyway. Yet, expectations for Republicans are so low that clearing this bar was remarkable to some pundits and journalists. They hailed Trump as a different kind of Republican. It made no sense, but it sold newspapers and it brought in ratings. It was a talking point based on almost nothing. Whenever then candidate Trump would refer to the LGBT community, he would never speak about protecting their rights, but instead protecting them from the various boogeymen he used to rile up xenophobia and white nativism. According to Parker Malloy of Media Matters, on June 14, 2016, Trump tweeted, "Thank you to the LGBT community. I will fight for you while Hillary brings in more people that will threaten your freedoms and beliefs." The tweet was one of several empty platitudes Trump offered to LGBTQ Americans following the mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, and at first glance it might look like a sign of support. Upon closer reading, it's clear that when he said "fight for you," he wasn't referring to fighting for LGBTQ civil rights at home. Instead, Trump's statement used the community as another justification for his anti-Muslim immigration proposals. In his first speech following the Pulse attack, Trump claimed that he was a friend of women and the LGBT community because, unlike Clinton, he would not allow radical Islamic terrorists to pour into our country, saying, "They enslave women and murder gays." Again, this wasn't a promise to support LGBTQ rights, but a promise to physically protect LGBTQ people from what he considered a hateful foreign ideology, Islam. Trump said almost nothing during his campaign about any deep sympathy with the plight of the LGBT community. He said almost nothing about any proposals to better protect them from discrimination. The mistaken belief that Trump and his administration would protect the rights of LGBT Americans springs partly from propaganda, partly from the media's insistence on making this a story, and partly from an ignorance about the interconnected nature of ideology. A candidate's ideology, or any person's ideology, is a system of ideas and values. More than that, the ideas and values are related, having related origins and related goals. There is a reason why a man who believes that a woman's place is in the kitchen, or that men ought to be higher than women on a social hierarchy, is also likely to believe that gay people should not be allowed to marry, that trans people cannot be trusted, that prayer should be allowed in public schools, and that patriotism is always good and never bad. Because this hypothetical man has been brought up to believe in a set of values that glorify his place in the world as a straight man, probably a white straight man, with the goal of bringing society back to these values to further his place in the world as morally right and logically correct. This is also Trump's base, but that is not actually the point. The point is that nobody has just one bad take. If you scratch a homophobe, you will find a transphobe, because these ideals, these values, these individual political positions are related to one's larger ideology. None of this means that an ideology of traditional values or any other ideology is completely uniform, nor is it permanent. But the fact that Trump's politics during his campaign were so consistently right-wing should have set off alarms that his courting of the LGBT community was insincere. That should have been enough for the media, but a story is a story, and they went with the story. To their credit, they have begun to wake up about this in a very can't believe the leopards are eating my face kind of way, but the talking point is now so entrenched and the news cycles go so quickly that many are likely to still remember this more than what is actually happening right now. So, what are all these hostile actions and civil rights rollbacks that the Trump administration has taken? Fortunately for anyone trying to put together a timeline, GLAAD keeps track of all of this with over 100 examples, all sourced with links to media articles that confirm these examples. Going through every example would take the whole video, so here is a 6-minute summary of the worst of the worst. This will only take into consideration Trump himself, his advisors under his authority, and the cabinet under his authority, meaning the vice president and the executive departments. The rest of the Republican Party is another topic altogether. On January 20th, 2017, mere minutes after being sworn into office, the Trump administration removed any reference to the LGBT community from White House, Department of Labor, and Department of State websites. On the same day, Mike Pence became vice president. Pence spent his life both in politics and on the radio as one of America's leading anti-gay figures. On February 7th, Betsy DeVos assumed her office as head of the Department of Education. DeVos has ties to anti-gay organizations. On February 22nd, Trump and Attorney General Jeff Sessions removed Title IX protection for transgender students. On March 30th, the Trump administration removed the LGBT community from both the National Survey of Older Americans Act and Annual Program Performance Report for Centers for Independent Living. These are surveys that are used to provide for senior citizens, including disability, transportation, and caregiver needs. On March 28th, the Trump administration announced it would not include LGBT people in the upcoming census, despite a request from the Census Bureau the previous year. On April 14th, the Trump administration filed to dismiss a lawsuit in North Carolina alleging anti-gay discrimination. On June 1st, Trump refused to declare June as Pride Month, but did declare it Great Outdoors Month, National Homeownership Month, and National Ocean Month. On June 7th, Trump nominated Stephen S. Schwartz to U.S. Court of Federal Claims. Schwartz worked with North Carolina legislators in support of the anti-trans legislation known as HB 2. On June 15th, Trump rolled back the Office for Civil Rights and their work investigating civil rights complaints and protecting LGBT students. Internal memos revealed the new procedure was to completely dismiss discrimination claims about transgender students needing access to bathrooms. The Department of Education later confirmed this. On the same day, the Department of Education hosted anti-gay groups like Focus on the Family and Family Research Council to a conference on child welfare. Again, on the very same day, the Department of Commerce removed sexual orientation and gender identity from the agency's equal employment policy. On June 17th, much of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS resigned, saying that Trump does not care about AIDS. Later that year, he fired the rest of the council. Trump nominated Mark Norris to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Tennessee. Norris supported legislation that allowed counselors to discriminate against LGBT patients. On July 26th, Trump declared a ban on all transgender service members from the military. The ban took effect on April 12th the next year, after a long battle in the courts. On August 3rd, Jerome Adams became the Surgeon General of the United States. Adams previously defended Mike Pence during his refusal to help AIDS patients during a crisis in Indiana. On September 7th, Trump nominated Jeff Mateer for the U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of Texas. Mateer is an anti-LGBT activist who once called transgender people Satan's plan. For brevity, no more judicial nominations will be mentioned, but suffice it to say, there are a lot more and a lot worse. These judges will have a deleterious effect on LGBT rights long after the Trump administration. On September 7th, the Department of Justice supported so-called religious exemptions that are often used to discriminate against LGBT people. On October 5th, the Trump administration reversed the Title VII policy that provided non-discrimination protections for transgender people. On October 13th, Trump spoke at an event for anti-LGBT group the Family Research Council. On October 17th, Trump spoke at an event for another anti-LGBT group, the Heritage Foundation. On December 5th, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders told reporters that Trump's position is that business owners should be able to put up signs saying they won't serve gays. On January 18, 2018, the Department of Health and Human Services created a division specifically designed to endorse and protect healthcare workers who refuse to help LGBT patients. On May 11th, the Trump administration rolled back protections for incarcerated transgender people. On October 21st, the Department of Health and Human Services proposed a change to the legal definition of sex, which would remove non-discrimination protections for transgender, non-binary, and intersex Americans. On January 23, 2019, the Trump administration approved a waiver request by South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster, allowing adoption agencies to discriminate against LGBT couples. On February 8th, the administration confirmed it will be granting federal funds to adoption agencies that use religious exemptions to discriminate against LGBT couples. On April 4th, the Department of Housing and Urban Development refused to reinstate non-discrimination guidelines that would protect LGBT Americans. On April 17th, the Department of Health and Human Services announced that it would no longer collect data on LGBT foster children. On May 13th, Trump opposed the Equality Act. On May 24th, Trump announced a new policy stating transgender Americans would not be guaranteed health care protections under the Affordable Care Act. On August 14th, Trump urged the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission to allow discrimination against LGBT Americans. On September 20th, the Department of Education removed the terms sexual orientation and gender identity in their data that tracks student bullying. On December 17th, the Trump administration appointed anti-gay activist Tim Wildman to the White House Faith Advisory Council. On April 24th, 2020, during the pandemic no less, the Trump administration moved to end a hospital non-discrimination policy. Under this new rule, hospitals and healthcare workers can more easily discriminate against patients based on gender or sexual orientation. On May 28th, the Trump administration threatened to withhold funding for states that allow transgender athletes to compete. On June 14th, the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced it was considering removing a rule that required homeless shelters to allow access to transgender people. On June 22nd, Trump opposed new protections granted to LGBT Americans by the Supreme Court. Trump's press secretary later reinforced Trump's opposition. For about 100 more examples, please check the aforementioned GLAAD article in the description. In the face of all these rollbacks and new forms of discrimination, how does the Trump administration manage to keep this talking point going among its base? What are its counters to this? They have 3, and they are all easily debunked. The first is that if the economy is good, then the economy is good for everyone, including LGBT people. This is the same deflection for whenever Trump's unambiguous racism is pointed out. Someone, or Trump himself, will say that the economy is good, and since everyone benefits from the economy, then he can't be racist or homophobic. This is obviously a weak argument, as whether unemployment is up or down is not related to opposing or supporting policies related to discrimination. As weak as it was already, it has fallen apart even further in 2020. The second deflection is that Trump has not reversed the same-sex marriage ruling. This is another weak argument because the ruling was from the Supreme Court. The Trump administration does not have the authority to reverse the same-sex marriage ruling. It's particularly weak because Trump has, on numerous occasions, remarked that he opposes same-sex marriage. The third argument is that the Trump administration set up a global initiative to end the criminalization of homosexuality. This is another weak argument because this is only another version of the initiative from the previous administration, not something new, and it is apparently a less active version of it. It is also unremarkable to believe homosexuality should be decriminalized in the year 2020, as it was decriminalized in much of the world a long time ago, certainly in the United States. In some countries, it was never even a crime. This is not a radical statement in 2020. It was not even a radical statement 50 years ago. So this is all garbage. Other arguments amount to whataboutism about Barack Obama or Joe Biden, and if you want to use that logical fallacy, sell it to someone who actually identifies with the Democratic Party. This is how the Trump administration responds to questions about its terrible LGBT rights record. Listen to the reporter, and then immediately as LGBT rights come up, watch the press secretary search for her binder for the stock answer to any question about said rights.
We're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of the president tweeting he banned transgender people from the military in any capacity, which led to the policy currently in place. Last week, a group of 116 lawmakers led by Congresswoman Del Bene wrote the administration urging them to lift the policy. Would the president reconsider the policy?
I haven't talked to him about that specific policy, but this president is proud that in 2019 we launched a global initiative to end the criminalization of homosexuality throughout the world.
See, any question about their dismal record of rollbacks and new discrimination policies can't be answered. So whenever a policy is brought up, the press secretary says she doesn't know anything about that, and then deflects into referencing one of the 3 aforementioned weak defenses. In this case, the global initiative, that is mostly a farce and nothing new. They can't respond to their record, so they built in nonsense answers, and apparently, the latest empty press secretary is still looking at her cue cards instead of memorizing her lines. According to Pink News, the official 2020 Republican platform has not changed anything from the 2016 Republican platform, which condemned same-sex marriage and called for the right to discriminate against LGBT Americans. This is the platform, meaning this is what Trump is running on. There is no reasonable argument that Trump was, is, or ever will be good or even passable on LGBT issues. His ideology is a series of blunt prejudices and narcissism, and the embarrassingly bad arguments that defend him are easily debunked.
We have an estimated 14,700 people in the military who identify as transgender. We have a poll showing upwards of 70% of Americans support transgender service, and we have major medical and psychological groups saying there's no problem with transgender people in the military. So what is the reason for having the policy currently in place?
I have no updates for you, but several of the events that you cited